Hey everybody, it's Professor Malott. Welcome back. This video, we're going to talk about revision strategies for coherence and balance. So when you think about revision, I don't want you to think about just proofreading, fixing commas, periods, semicolons, spelling, that kind of stuff. Revision is really the deeper work of how you make your writing clearer, more coherent, and more balanced. So we're going to explore what's called global and local revision. So it's important to have this kind of distinction and understand what I mean when I talk about global revision versus local revision. So global revision, it focuses on the big picture, right? You're focusing on your argument, the structure of your essay, the organization, how things flow together, the logic of your ideas, and that kind of thing. So when you're revising globally, you're going to ask questions like, does my thesis go along with the things that I'm arguing, right? Are my ideas in the best order? Do my paragraphs build from one another, right? Are they building onto each other? So global revision is where the real transformation in your writing occurs. Local revision, on the other hand, is really focusing on sentence level stuff. You want to make sure that your words are clear, you have a good word choice, your grammar is done well, and that you have a certain style, right? That you have a unique voice, that kind of thing. So local revision, yes, it's important, but it really should come after you make sure that everything in that big picture, the global revision, is working correctly. So a helpful way to think about it is global revision is like remodeling a house. Local revision is more like repainting the walls. You don't want to paint the walls before you make sure that the walls are actually in the right place, right? And that they're hung plumb. So global revision first, local revision next. So once your global structure is solid, the next thing that you want to check for is flow, right? And I say here on the slide, go with the flow. So you want to think about the smooth movement of ideas from one sentence and one paragraph to the next. So a good test is to read your draft out loud, read your writing out loud. If you're stumbling over the things that you've written, if you're backtracking or you feel like you're jumping to new things too quickly, that's a sign that you might need some work on your transitions. Now, transitions don't have to be fancy, right? They can be simple phrases like in contrast or building on this idea or another perspective suggests. Sometimes those kinds of phrases are enough to guide your reader from one idea to another idea. But transitions aren't just words, they're also logic. So you want to ask yourself, especially on the sentence level, right? Sentence to sentence. Do the sentences flow together logically? And then, of course, paragraph to paragraph. Does each paragraph grow out of the one before it? And you want to make sure that your topics in your paragraphs are connecting back to your thesis, as well as the evidence that you have. Is it connecting to your main point? And you want to make sure that the reader always knows that or understands why a certain idea comes next, right? So another key part of your revision is checking for balance. Well, you want to make sure you have smooth transitions too. I got ahead of myself. So with your transitions, you want to make sure the sentences flow together logically. Same with the paragraphs. Do they each grow out of the one before it? And you want to make sure that your evidence is relating back to your main point with your transitions. So checking for balance is also an important part of your revisions. So especially when you're writing about a topic that has multiple viewpoints. So, for example, if you're doing a research argument or a synthesis argument essay where you have to examine multiple perspectives, It's important that your writing values fairness, right? And that you're checking for balance. So even if you're ultimately arguing for one side or you favor one side over the other, you need to represent opposing perspectives accurately and respectfully. So you want to, when you're revising, ask yourself and check for balance. Have I summarized those opposing viewpoints fairly without oversimplifying them? Have I acknowledged the strongest counter arguments and not just the easy ones? That's hard to do. And have I explained why my position still holds, even after considering the other perspectives? Balanced writing does not weaken your argument. In fact, it probably strengthens it because you're showing that you've thought critically, you've looked at various perspectives, you've evaluated all of the evidence, and you've made a reasoned judgment. I also want to talk briefly about peer feedback. That's something that we always do in our English comp classes, and getting feedback, of course, is valuable. Giving feedback is valuable, but using it effectively is also a skill that you need to develop in your classes. So when you receive comments, whether that is feedback you've gotten from your instructor or feedback that you've gotten from peers, maybe both, you don't need to treat them as commands. Instead, treat them as data, right? You want to look for patterns. So some of the questions that you are going to be asking yourself here is, are multiple readers confused at the same point? So if your instructor and your peer reviewer comment on the same things or are asking the same kinds of questions, you might want to consider their perspectives and integrate that feedback. Another thing is, are they asking for more explanation in the same paragraph or in the same section of my paper? If they need more, then that is your indicator that you might have to add some information so that it's clear to the reader that your argument makes sense. Another question, are they interpreting your thesis differently than you intended? And that might just be because the things that they are reading in your body paragraphs don't actually relate to your thesis in your introduction, right? You might be going off on tangents. So again, looking to see what your reviewers are saying can be good data for you when it comes to revision. So those patterns can sometimes tell you where your writing isn't doing what you thought it was doing. But also, I want you to remember that you don't have to accept every criticism or every suggestion. So instead, you want to ask yourself these questions. What problem is this comment pointing to, right? Is there another way that I can solve that problem? And does this change support my purpose or reflect my voice, right? If you are altering your voice because somebody else said, well, you should really say it this way, and that's a mistake I made early on in my career, in my feedback to students, I was like, well, you should write it like this, which, of course, takes away agency from students. So you really, to grow as a writer, you want to develop your own voice while also meeting all the recommendations and requirements for the assignment. So peer feedback and instructor feedback is most powerful when you use it to make intentional changes and thoughtful revisions, not just those quick fixes. So to wrap it up, global revision helps you to strengthen your argument as well as the structure of your essays. Checking for flow and checking the transitions ensures that your ideas connect smoothly and you maintain that logical flow throughout your paper. Balancing perspectives shows fairness, and it shows that you're thinking critically about all of the evidence out there, not just the evidence for your side of the argument. And integrating feedback can help you revise with clarity and purpose. Remember that revision isn't just correcting your mistakes. It's not just checking your grammar or punctuation or spelling. It's much bigger than that. It's shaping your writing into its best version. And that's where your ideas become clearer, stronger, and more compelling. And in turn, that helps you to become a more confident writer. So just remember, revision is different than editing, right? Proofreading, editing, and revision, they all go together, but revision is really what strengthens your writer and makes your writing the very best that it can be. All right. Good luck with your writing. Take care, everybody.